Look what's arrived. What are we calling this? BBC Broadcasts. Genesis box set. So this is a vinyl. I don't have the CD today. I think I might get it at some point. I was definitely in a rush to get this, and I'll put up some B-roll of this so you can see this a little bit better. But we're gonna talk about this today. We're gonna go really deep. And one of the things I wanna talk about is I wanna compare it to some of the other stuff that they've done recently. And I also there's a lot of questions about how does it sound, especially how does it sound compared to the bootlegs that some of us already have access to. I actually have two examples. I have one example where I have a vinyl copy of a song that's on here, the exact same recording from the exact same day that's on here on another record we'll talk about in a second. And then I have another recording that is about 2 days earlier of the same song. So we'll talk about those and how they compare. Honestly, this just arrived a few hours ago. And so I ripped it open. I took a look at everything because I want to talk about how it looks. And I also had to listen to everything. So let's first of all talk about the design before we go any further. There's a lot of, first of all, I love this design. This is what we would call skeuomorphic design, where it's kind of pretending to be vintage. It looks like an old photo album. It's taped together with masking tape. The whole insides of the jackets are so well done with some memorabilia. Looks kind of like what they've done in previous special edition magazines. So it's really, really well done. It is really good. This skeuomorphic design, some people don't like it, but I really like it. And I want to just compare this design of this whole package. Oh, and by the way, I was really curious how they were going to do 3 records, if they were going to do it like Phil Collins singles or like The Last Domino. And so each panel here, the record fits into the middle or over here. And there's 3 records. I'll tell you the track listing in a second, but most of you probably already know that. This record here, I think, is poorly designed in the sense that it's ugly, no disrespect. The purple is weird. I do like the white, but what I really like about this is like how sturdy the spine is, and that these records, I think there's 4 or 5 of them, they open like a book. Those are really cool. So I really like how they did this, and this is heavy as heck. And so I was thinking that they would go that direction. I don't like this. If anyone have this came out like in 2016, 2017, and this is just a box. It literally is a box of discs, and it's not a great way to listen to music. They all get mixed up, and I never listened to this, and I don't like this box set. This is also sort of skeuomorphic, but not so great. This graffiti on a old brick wall, which is kind of reminiscent of an old copy of Hanging Long Enough, I believe, the 12-inch. And then you've got all these kind of singles. We're not talking about this today, but so this is like so vibrant. It looks so good. It is the best thing that I think it's the best design they've ever done. And I mean, I know a lot of you don't like that Genesis logo there. You can't, I don't know if you can see that. They didn't use it very much, which is nice. And I like that new logo that they have on the front, which is kind of the invisible touch text, I think, maybe. So from a design perspective, I'm just thrilled with how good it looks. The track listing, real quick. So we have 3 vinyl, and the CD was much more. Now, remember when Nick first talked about this back in the fall of 2022 on an interview? And I think he said 5 vinyl and 3 CDs. Well, he got that mixed up, and it was actually 3 vinyl and 5 CDs, which doesn't really make sense because 5 vinyl records, now that would cost like $150, $120. I wouldn't have minded that at all. 5 vinyl records is about the same amount of information you can fit on 3 CDs. And so that's why it made sense when he said that. Instead, we have 3 vinyl. On side 1 is The Musical Box from 1972, Stagnation from 1971, Harlequin and Harold the Barrel from 1972. Side 2 is Get 'Em Out by Friday, Watch of the Skies. Then we hop over to 1980, the Truncated Dancing with the Moonlit Night and Carpet Crawlers. Then we go to disc 2, and that set continues with, they kind of bulked them together a little bit like from albums, because on disc 2, side 1, Behind the Lines, Dutch's Guide Vocal, Duke's Travels, Duke's End. Then on side 2, we have Say It's All Right, Joe, The Lady Lies, and I Know What I Like. And on the final disc, we have something from Wembley, Mama, That's All, Home by the Sea, Second Home by the Sea. And on side B is Throwing It All Away, No Son of Mine, and Driving the Last Spike. We're going to talk about the track listing in a few moments. There's so much we have to cover. I have some theories as to why they picked these tracks. Real quick, let's just talk about the good things, just in case I get overly critical, which I'm not. I'm not the person to be overly critical here. The good thing is more releases, please. I have no problems doing this. Out of these songs, this is the first time they're officially released, and they've been remastered, and the sound is really good. So the sound is great, the design is great. I'm so thrilled to have it. 3 discs is great. 3 discs are better than 2 and better than 1. Would have been really nice to have 5. There's so many songs on the CDs that I'm excited to hear, and so far it hasn't been released digitally. I thought it would have been released today digitally. Maybe they'll just do this, an exclusive window on this. So I wouldn't be surprised, I've seen other bands do this, that there's an exclusive window on the physical for a couple of months, and then maybe this summer or the fall, they'll do an official digital release. That's my theory. I mean, they're going to release it digitally because there's money. There's money to be made in this on streaming. Even on streaming, there's money to be made. So this could be an early window, or maybe they never release it. I doubt that. There's some stuff that I feel like I've been wanting on vinyl. The Invisible Touch era, surprisingly not much at all from Invisible Touch. There's only 1 song from Invisible Touch on this vinyl. So that was kind of disappointing that we don't have like the Wembley entirety show. A lot of people talk about that, how like we miss out on having entire shows. I've said all along, I've wanted the Live in Europe to be pressed to vinyl. That entire show was so good, such a great track listing. Everybody sounded great. Sound quality is really good in that era. We could lightly have that remastered and put on vinyl. But the problem is that one of the reasons why you don't get entire shows released on vinyl is because it's too many discs. An entire show is like 2 pushing on 3 hours, probably closer to 3 hours. And then you have records that can't push more than 20 to 25 minutes per side. So you're now talking, 20 minutes, right? So now you're talking like you need 6 discs maybe to fit everything on. It just like economically, it doesn't make sense. So I don't think we'll ever get that, unfortunately. So it makes a little bit more sense to do these greatest hits live albums, even though I think we all would love like just pick one show and release the whole thing. I just don't ever see that happening. That would be nice with the 1980 show that's on here. It would be nice with the 1987 show, would be great, but I don't see that happening. There's some great write-ups about the recordings and on each record, and I haven't got a chance to read those yet. And there's a little bit of stats. I want to show you another cool thing, just as like a nice little touch. So this label here is actually very similar to the label from The Last Domino. And then on each disc, there's a little bit of like a homage to each era. So there's We Can't Dance, and there's a great shot of Peter on the label. Really cool. And then the other one is the Dominoes from the Invisible Touch tour. So let's talk about the sound. We know a little bit from Nick is that there were multi-tracks archived for some of the newer stuff, but not so much from the earlier stuff. So we can kind of assume then that the Peter stuff, so basically Watcher of the Skies from 1975 and beyond, is stuff that they would have just been mixing from a stereo mix, from tape likely. And then possibly from like 1980 and beyond, they maybe had multi-tracks. And so I was kind of expecting things to be like drastically different, but I'll be honest, like this whole package is like mastered really nicely together so that if you are going, especially if you're listening on CD or if they eventually release it digitally, and you listen to the first song, The Musical Box from 1972, and then at some point you find yourself listening to Driving the Last Spike from 20 years later, that it doesn't like too much of a drastic sound difference. And that's the whole concept of mastering. Whereas if you were listening to a bootleg from the early Peter years versus like The Way We Walk on vinyl, you would notice a huge sound difference. And so I did actually notice that like overall the sound was like pretty tight together. One of the things that you get from bootlegs and older recordings is there isn't that huge low end information. It's kind of easy to like sprinkle high end and to brighten things, but it's hard to make things beefier sounding. So I did notice that like the earlier stuff was not as thick in the low end, and actually the same thing for like the 80s stuff, early 80s stuff, like Behind the Lines wasn't really punchy. But what I did appreciate was that the bass was tightened, the bass sound was punchy and not boomy. Sometimes you want things to sound boomy because it feels like you're getting your money's worth. And so it doesn't sound entirely hi-fi, but I actually would rather like a nice tight bass, kick drum and bass. And I found that to be the case on Behind the Lines. I found that to be the case on The Lady Lies, sounds really good. And there's like a nice tightness too for like Get 'Em Out by Friday. Honestly, across the board, it sounds really good. Now, I'm comparing, here's something interesting. I didn't compare this drastically with a bunch of other live bootlegs, MP3s or WAV files that are out there. But I did compare this to vinyl bootlegs I have. So this bootleg here, as some of you will be familiar with, is called The Rarest Live. There's 3 versions of this, 3 volumes. And on this copy I have, it just so happens to have, on the back there, you can see potentially that it says Stagnation, which is actually not on this record, but that version of Stagnation is allegedly from the same that is on our new package. And then there's also Get 'Em Out by Friday. And so on here, it says Get 'Em Out by Friday, John Peel Radio Shows 1972. So this record here, which I think these probably were pressed in the 80s maybe. We have this old bootleg here of the actual Get 'Em Out by Friday from John Peel that is also on side B of this record. So I was able to listen to the original bootleg and compare it to the Nick Davis remaster. Now, he would have been just remastering something very similar to this file. And what I could say is that the noise is gone. Like, there's not as much noise. You're not going to hear any of that, like, S's problems. It's much brighter. Like, this is way more muffled. So this is like much crispier and brighter. I think it's just overall a better listening experience. Remember, these weren't like mastered by like very thoughtful mastering engineers. These were pressed really quickly, and they were pressed illegally. And they were kind of just like, let's make as much money off this band as we can without getting caught. So these aren't really audiophile records, these bootlegs, whereas this is like an official release. And so that's one of the reasons why we're glad to have records like this, and we hope they do more of it. Not likely, but we hope. So comparing, being able to compare and literally dropping the needle on Get 'Em Out by Friday, the original version, then dropping the needle on this right after, I was able to hear the difference. A lot more clarity and a lot less noise. And the same can be said for this bootleg. Some of you might be familiar with this. So this bootleg was recorded at the Theatre Royal. Is that how you say it? Theatre Royal in London on May 4th, 1980. And this has some tracks from Duke. And so I was able to compare Behind the Lines from here. Remember, May 4th, 1980, and the Behind the Lines and the Duke suite from this record was actually recorded on May 6th and May 7th of 1980. So that's really interesting, is that my copy of Behind the Lines was recorded 4 days earlier than this was recorded. And so I was able to compare those. Now, the bootlegs I have are actually sound pretty good. So I was surprised that the older version of Behind the Lines wasn't that bad. But again, a lot of the noise is gone, and there's modern day plugins. I don't know if Nick used modern day audio plugins, but some of the noise I feel like has been taken away. That could also just be new vinyl versus old vinyl. That could be the case as well. But overall, like, way clearer, so much more clarity. I think the stereo image is more defined. It's a little bit wider, and that would be normal. Whether or not that was faked, which is, there's something that you can do. You can fake that a little bit or emphasized, but overall it's just clearer. It's just like much brighter. My version of Behind the Lines was muddy and dark, and this version was really good. Now, there was something I noticed. Maybe it was Stagnation or maybe Watch of the Skies. One of the earlier ones, I suspect, and forgive me, Nick, if I'm wrong, but I suspect that there is fake reverb on some of the earlier stuff. I'll tell you why. Generally, when there's soundboard recordings, so you take, they hook a cassette deck or a reel-to-reel machine to the soundboard and take the stereo mix of that and record it to tape. Generally, you wouldn't have any room mics. You certainly wouldn't have like microphones at the back of the room getting the reflections off the wall. So the soundboard wouldn't be hearing the same thing that the people in the theater would be hearing. They'd be hearing all of those reflections and then all of the people clapping. So if you listen to a lot of bootlegs from any era, it sounds really dry, right? It sounds like oftentimes the background vocals are too loud and there's no reverb. And so I have a theory that some of the earlier songs on here, and again, I honestly just got it a few hours ago, so I can't make a full decision, but it does feel like there's kind of fake room noise, that there is kind of like some bounce back reflections that I just don't think would have been in the actual recording, unless they did have mics at the back of the room or hanging. I don't buy it. I think that there's some aftermarket reverb added to the earlier tracks, could have been added to all of the songs. And reverb is nice too, because it brings up the low end. It's like really nice and beefy, smooths everything over. It's like putting a gloss over everything. So Nick, if you're out there, please let me know if you added any reverb. We won't, that's okay. We won't judge you for that. But like when you're making a live recording, right, you kind of want to make it sound like a live recording, and reverb is how you do that. Let's talk about the track listing. This is weird. I'll be honest with you. I can't put my finger on what they were trying to do. Here's my theory. My theory is that they tried to not to overstep what Seconds Out is and what Three Sides Live is, and perhaps even what we have with The Way We Walk. Three Sides Live is a very popular record. A lot of people have copies of it. For that reason, we don't have anything from Abacab on this vinyl. There might be Abacab stuff on the CDs. Again, I'm not talking about the CDs today because I haven't really had a chance to look at those yet. But we don't have anything from Abacab. And if you look at Three Sides Live sounds really good. And Abacab, the song sounds good. There's Me and Sarah Jane, Dodo, right? What else is there anything else from that record on there? So I think the CDs have Man on the Corner and Abacab. Am I right on that? It's really too bad we didn't get Man on the Corner on here. And similarly, we don't really have like good vinyl or official release coverage of live music from the Shapes tour. And that's why I think we have a whole half side of Mama, That's All, Home by the Sea 1 and Home by the Sea 2. We also don't have like tons of music from the And Then There Were Three era. And so for that reason, we have The Lady Lies and Say It's All Right, Joe, and Follow You, Follow Me is on Three Sides Live, but it's not on here. It is on the CDs of this version. So I'm kind of going with this theory. And then if you look at the earlier stuff, like there's not so much overlap of Seconds Out either. That's why we don't have anything from Trick of the Tail on this vinyl, which I think is weird. And we don't have anything from Wind and Wuthering. And again, I think it's because those two records were covered really well on Seconds Out. Well, not Wind and Wuthering. I think it's too bad. Okay, so some of the songs I'm missing from here, from the vinyl, I'm missing One for the Vine. I would have liked Deep in the Motherlode. I think Throwing It All Away is weird. It doesn't really fit on here. And I think I would have preferred like Tonight Tonight or The Brazilian, I think would have been really cool. That leads me to my other theory. My other theory is that this record, because this package is not really for like passive Genesis fans, this is for like big Genesis fans. And so my theory is that like there's kind of a lot of deep cuts on here. Like we're kind of missing a lot of the hits. Turn It On Again's not on here. Follow You, Follow Me's not on here. Invisible Touch is not on here. Tonight Tonight. Even earlier stuff like Cinema Show and Firth isn't on here. Supper's Ready's not on here. It's kind of like a lot of like The Lady Lies is weird. Say It's All Right, Joe, that's weird that that's on here. Driving the Last Spike. The only like super, super big hits would be like No Son of Mine, Throwing It All Away, Mama, maybe I Know What I Like, Musical Box, maybe. I think one of the objectives with this project was to do kind of a deep cut record. That's kind of what I think. I mean, both theories there's holes in both theories, because if they're trying to do live music that isn't covered on The Way We Walk and isn't covered on Seconds Out or Three Sides Live, then why don't we have more from Invisible Touch? Those songs are on The Way We Walk. And then the other problem with the theory of deep cuts is like, why Throwing It All Away? Why not The Brazilian? Why That's All instead of like Abacab or Man on the Corner? I don't know. But like all like Genesis set lists and basically Tony's job for his whole life has been challenging to pick which songs to put on what. And one of the things I'll say about this that I really love is like we have 3 discs and they're kind of different, right? Like the early disc is like lo-fi, Peter Gabriel era, little bit of like storytelling, like kind of folksy pastoral era. Then you have like the middle disc, which is kind of like the Duke, and then there were 3 era, that middle section, early Phil Collins era, and then the last disc is more like from the 80s Genesis and early 90s Genesis. And so I do like that it's like kind of 3 themes. It's like, what are you feeling like today? Are you feeling like Home by the Seas and Driving the Last Spike? Then grab disc 3. Are you feeling more like that artsy side of Genesis? Then grab disc 1. So I kind of like it for that reason. And again, I'm not going to complain about anything they release because I have this problem where I buy it all. I'm not going to complain. And I think this package looks absolutely stunning. The discs are 180. it's so great. I think it's great. And I've been so busy tonight since this arrived, looking at everything and listening to things real quick, comparing it to my bootlegs, reading the liner notes as fast as possible, and getting ready to film this so I could get this up as quickly as possible. But I'm looking forward to just sitting back and listening to this record because it sounds really beautiful. And even though I love my bootlegs, I love listening to like busted up recordings, and I have like a horrible recording, Phil Collins bootleg, and I love listening to it. It's going to be nice to listen to live Genesis that is touched up and remastered. My last thing I'll say about this project is I want to go back to this when we talked about it at the very beginning. So this was a vinyl box set that coincided with the Last Domino tour. And the track listing is essentially the set list from the Last Domino tour, but it's not a live album because Phil's voice was in rough shape. And so they couldn't do a traditional live album. So instead, we have the set list, but they're just the original songs. Here's what I think they should have done with this. This was like an asinine project, even though I'm glad to have like a quasi greatest hits on vinyl. So here's what I think they should have done. So instead of this, which is like a greatest hits package, but not a greatest hits package, and a live album, but not a live album, instead of doing this, I think they should have done a Last Domino, but kept the song list the same. But instead of using studio recordings, they should have done live recordings remastered from throughout all of the years. And so basically like a live greatest hits album. That's what they did with this. This is like a live greatest hits album, except they're all deep cuts, or a lot of them are deep cuts. This would have been really cool because the band isn't in their prime anymore and Phil is having trouble. You can't do a Last Domino live album. This would have been really cool if they instead had taken the songs from the Last Domino tour, but had taken them from tours from throughout all of the years. And so Carpet Crawlers would have been done by the Lamb era, and then Fading Lights would have come from remastered from The Way We Walk. Into Deep could have come from Wembley show. Duchess could have come from the 1980 show that's on this one. Cinema Show you could have taken from maybe Seconds Out, or you could have taken it from something on one of the Peter tours, like on the Selling England by the Pound tour. The Home by the Seas could have been taken from the Shapes tour. I just think that could have been really cool. But nobody asked me my opinion. Too late now. But that's okay. I'm very happy to have this. I'm excited to check out the CD and to listen to some of the music from the CD. How many of you out there picked up this on vinyl, and how many of you picked it up on CD? And I would like to know your thoughts. And if you didn't pick this up yet, there's a link in the description and in the comments below that you can click on that to get the CD or the vinyl. If you have any questions about this, if I've forgotten to mention everything, I've tried to cover as much of this as possible. But if you want to ask me something about the artwork or the sound or some of the liner notes, and if you don't have a copy, let me know and I'll do my best to answer those questions. Thanks so much for watching.